The headline at Politico.com right now, just breaking in the last few minutes, is this. United States Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights, draft opinion shows. According to an initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Samuel Alito, circulated inside the court and obtained by Politico, the Supreme Court has voted to strike down the landmark Roe v. Wade decision. The draft opinion is a full-throated, unflinching repudiation of the 1973 decision, which guaranteed federal constitutional protections of abortion rights, and also a subsequent 1992 decision, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which largely maintained the right. Alito writes in this draft majority opinion, quote, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overturned. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives, which, as Chris was just mentioning there, means returning it to the states. And in more than 24 states, there are what are called trigger laws, which would immediately render abortion a crime, render it illegal, immediately upon the Supreme Court issuing such a ruling. As Josh Gerstein reports, along with his colleague Alexander Ward at Politico tonight, quote, the immediate impact of the ruling would be to end a half-century guarantee of federal constitutional protection of abortion rights. It would allow each state to decide whether to restrict or ban abortion. It is unclear if there have been subsequent changes to the draft. This draft ruling that has been obtained and published by Politico tonight was reportedly drafted in February. Politico received a copy of the draft opinion, quote, from a person familiar with the court's proceedings in the Mississippi case, the abortion case, along with other details supporting the authenticity of the document. The draft opinion runs 98 pages. The document is replete with citations to previous court decisions, books, and authorities, and includes 118 footnotes. The appearances and timing of this draft are consistent with court practice. The disclosure of Alito's draft majority opinion is a rare breach of Supreme Court secrecy and tradition around its deliberations. Joining us now is Josh Gerstein. He's the senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. He's one of the best legal reporters and legal political explainers in the country. He broke this story tonight along with his colleague Alexander Ward. Josh, thank you for coming on tonight on such short notice. I realized that you didn't know 4 minutes ago that you were going to be on TV talking about this with me tonight.
No problem, Rachel. Happy to join you.
I'm not going to press you, of course, on your sourcing here, but I want to press you on your confidence in your sourcing. Obviously, this is a very unusual, if not completely historically unprecedented leak, a document that purports to be the draft majority opinion of the Supreme Court before they have issued any such ruling. Can you just tell us about your confidence in the authenticity of the document?
Well, we're very confident in the authenticity of this draft majority opinion, Rachel, both in the way that we obtained it and other information that we got that supports its authenticity and makes us believe that it is genuine. Now, of course, it's not a final opinion. It's a draft opinion. It was circulated in the court as a first draft by Justice Alito in February, dated February 10th. So it is possible there have been some changes since then, but it's our best understanding of at least where the court stood at that time, which is about 2.5 months after arguments in this pivotal Mississippi abortion case.
And you report, Josh, and again, forgive me if I get any of these details wrong. I am learning this as I'm talking about it, which is always dangerous. But you report that the court majority here is established, that there are, at least in the initial conference between the justices after the arguments, there were 5 votes on Justice Alito's reported side here. And the only ambiguity, the only question is whether or not Justice Roberts would make it a 6-3 decision or a 5-4 decision if he chose to side with the more liberal members of the court. Do you have any, what can you tell us about your reporting in terms of the numbers here, in terms of how the two sides align and whether that may still be a matter with some fluidity?
Well, it's our understanding from a person familiar with the proceedings that Justice Alito believes and that the court has 5 justices that are essentially aligned with this opinion that he's written, which is, just a withering takedown of the Roe v. Wade precedent. It pulls no punches at all. It's pretty brutal. And in the way it's structured, it kind of needs to be that way because of the way Alito confronts this issue of court precedent. Stare decisis is the legal term, and something has to be really, really wrong if they want to overturn it. And that's the case that Justice Alito makes here. There is still some ambiguity about where Chief Justice John Roberts stands. As many people noted at the oral arguments at the beginning of December, it sounded like he was finding a way maybe to approve this Mississippi law, which is a 15-week abortion ban, without completely ripping down the Roe v. Wade precedent. Our understanding is that, most of his Republican colleagues want to go ahead and take down Roe versus Wade. Now, that said, we're at the beginning of May here, and this final decision likely won't be published until the end of June, perhaps even the beginning of July. So it's fair to say that this, is a situation that is unresolved at this point, and I can't promise you that various things may not change between now and late June.
Josh, in terms of the substance of this opinion as written, again, this draft majority opinion, and with the caveat that this is a historically unprecedented leak of what appears to be a draft majority opinion from the court before any ruling is issued, with the caveat that you just described in terms of whether or not this may go through additional changes, even potentially substantial changes, before we see the ruling from the court as published later this year. With all those caveats intact, when you look at what Justice Alito wrote here, how does this comport with expectations in this case? Obviously, as you were just describing, the leanings of the justices on this matter, I think to realist-minded observers were clear even before oral arguments, and certainly were clear thereafter. But I think it was also perhaps still common wisdom that the justices would try to soft pedal this a little bit, that they would try to undermine Roe and effectively remove the protections of Roe without a sort of 21-gun salute, which is what this appears to be, at least in terms of the way that you've been able to describe Justice Alito's thinking. Is that a fair assessment of this, that this is more of a bludgeon when it was perhaps expected to be something more of a more subtle approach?
It's definitely a swing for the fences draft majority opinion. He's really holding nothing back here, Justice Alito. And, I know what the conventional wisdom was, Rachel, that maybe the court would try to soften the blow. But at those arguments, there was precious little indication of that from any of the Republican appointed justices other really than Chief Justice Roberts. And another reason to think that this may have full support from all the Republican-appointed justices except the chief, is if you go through the opinion, you'll find echoes in there of views that other members of the court have stated on previous occasions. There are parts of this opinion that sound a lot like Justice Clarence Thomas. When you read through it, you'll see on a few occasions the word abortionist appears in this opinion. That's a word that Justice Thomas has taken to using in recent years and that most of the other members of the court don't typically use. And there's another passage that seems to cater to some comments that Justice Amy Coney Barrett made at the oral arguments about the way views on sort of unwed pregnancy, out of wedlock births, and women's rights have evolved since the Roe v. Wade was handed down in 1973. So it really does seem that Alito is trying to cobble together a majority. People can also look at it and see how much do you think it does to address the concerns Chief Justice Roberts has raised about the credibility of the court and the concern about public opinion. I think there's portions in it that don't seem to give full weight to the chief's concerns, which also supports the notion that maybe he's not expecting to be part of this opinion.
Josh, in terms of the likely impact of a ruling, if it does in its final form look like what you have reported and published tonight, if we had a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate and a Republican in the White House, is there any line in this ruling, as you read it, that would prevent the legislature and the president from establishing a new law that full-on banned abortion in its entirety in every state in the country in every instance?
Well, it's a draft decision, and it doesn't really get into the issue of what the federal government's power, I think, would be in this area. So I think it certainly leaves that open as a possibility. There might be other obstacles to that, like the legislative filibuster we still have, at least for the time being, in the United States Senate. But, there are points at which Alito tries to suggest that, this won't bring all the scenery down. If we move away from abortion to other privacy-based rights, such as contraception, rights like gay marriage, he does try to ring fence this opinion and say, all we're talking about is abortion. He mentions that several times, and he suggests that it shouldn't be stretched into other areas. That said, I'm old enough to know that the court many times has said, don't try to apply our opinion on X to this situation Y because it's different, and yet it often does get applied that way. But there's no question he's trying to keep this confined to the issue of abortion.
And of course, that's telling in itself, right? To be be willing to say, like, oh, this is just about abortion. It's not about anything important. Don't worry. Tells you a lot about the frame of mind of the frame of mind behind people who would make this kind of a change. Let me just ask you about one last piece of this, Josh. Since we've been on the air, since we received your reporting tonight, since you published, we, on my show, have contacted 4 former clerks for Supreme Court justices, all of whom uniformly told us that the document that you have published tonight appears to be a legitimate work product of the court, meaning it just matches in form and style and texture the kind of product that they as clerks were used to seeing as a draft majority opinion. That highlights in itself, I think, the unique nature of this reporting that you have done and this leak. And I wonder if you have any reflection on what it might mean for the credibility of the court, for the legitimacy of the court, for a draft majority opinion to have made its way into your hands. This is something that has never happened before in the history of the court. And as a court observer and somebody who understands how the court fits into our politics, what sort of impact do you think this will have on the court itself?
Well, I mean, there have been leaks out of the court before, perhaps not of this magnitude, but we've all gotten kind of used to, on these big decisions, such as Obamacare, such as this abortion decision, to hints, body English, I might call it. There's a nuanced reading of editorials that appear in different places, places like the Wall Street Journal editorial page, where you can often see indications that maybe the court is moving one way and conservatives aren't happy about it. You do see that kind of dialogue, but never accompanied by an actual opinion. So I do think that this is groundbreaking, and it does take the court into new territory. It would certainly be very interesting to know what Chief Justice John Roberts thinks about this, even if he doesn't agree with this opinion. What does he think about whether this causes the court to be viewed as a political institution by some people? That's what we're going to have to see how it plays out over the next couple of months as this continues to resonate towards the final decision at the end of June.
Right. And the importance of Chief Justice Roberts' opinion on matters like that is not just, what he thinks as a person and how it affects him personally. It's that the court is effectively a self-regulating body that sets its own ethics and standards. And if this is going to sort of shake the foundations of the court and its perception and its role in politics, his opinion will be more important than anybody else's by a considerable margin. Josh Gerstein, senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, you will always, in your entire life, be the reporter who broke this story, whatever else happens in your life and everything else that you've done in the past. I know this is a really big deal, and I really appreciate you being here tonight with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Take care.
All right. I will just mention, let me just restate what it is that we are talking about here. Josh Gerstein, the reporter you just saw for Politico, along with his colleague Alexander Ward, has just broken this story, this remarkable story at Politico.com. Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights. Draft opinion shows. The fact that a draft opinion from the United States Supreme Court is in front of us is itself, as far as we know, an unprecedented thing. There have been leaks in the past, as Josh just mentioned, about what's happened during discussions among the justices about what may or may not have gone down in the room behind where the justices sit on the dais. We're also familiar with from court sketches when they sit down in conference to discuss what happens. We have had descriptions of those discussions in the past. We have never, as far as I know, had a written, in this case, 90-plus page draft majority opinion released to the public through a reporter before a ruling was actually issued. We don't know anything about who the source is. Josh, you just heard him speak in his own words about why he and his colleagues and his editors are confident in the sourcing of this matter. It's obviously an earthquake for all these substantive reasons. I will tell you, just as a matter in terms of our confidence in the story, we've spoken with a number, four different former Supreme Court clerks just in the last few minutes, who all say that they agree with Josh and his colleagues at Politico that this looks like a work product from the court, whether or not it has been or will be revised before it's ultimately published. The bottom line here is that this would appear to be the day that, I was born in 1973, which is the year that Roe versus Wade was passed. In my entire sentient life, women have been talking about the day that this would come, and that Roe versus Wade would be overturned, and that the United States would become a country in which abortion was treated as a crime, and it was the government, it was the state that is allowed to decide whether or not women give birth. It's the state that is allowed to force women to bring unwanted pregnancies to term, even if they, for the world's most greatest or lightest reasons, don't want to do it. Putting the government in control of women's lives in this way changes something fundamental about who we are as a country, who we are as a culture, and who we are as men and women. And if this change is coming not as a sort of feathered-in set of reforms designed to ultimately undermine the right or make it less available, like we have seen even over the course of this year as Republican-controlled states have been advancing these newly aggressive policies and the court's been letting them do it. But if instead they're just knocking it out and abortion is going to be illegal in every state that will make that happen on their own terms, or as the Washington Post reported just this morning and with this headline, the next frontier for the anti-abortion movement, a nationwide ban. The Washington Post literally reported this morning that leading anti-abortion groups and their allies in Congress have been meeting behind the scenes to plan a national strategy that would kick in if the Supreme Court rolls back abortion rights this summer, including a push for a strict nationwide ban on abortion if Republicans retake power in Washington. That was the news this morning. They are working on a nationwide abortion ban to make it a crime, coast to coast, everywhere in the country, as soon as they've got power. As Chris Hayes just noted a moment ago, it would be H.R. 1 or Senate Bill 1 if Republicans, in fact, get back in power. But to have that paired tonight with this draft opinion saying that the Supreme Court is about to clear the way just for that means that we are on the precipice of becoming a very different country and our daughters and granddaughters living in a very, very different world.